Today we are, that was a hint that today we're starting a new message series that is looking at Scripture through the lens of the cultural icon of the 1960s TV series, The Twilight Zone. We're calling this series Life in the Twilight Zone, and it's subtitled Liminality and the Kingdom of God. Now, I've already had a lot of you saying, I have no idea what that word liminality means. Well, I guarantee you, if you stick around with us for the next 4 Sundays, you will know more about that word than you ever wanted to know. You'll be able to add it to your lexicon. You'll have it to bring out at dinner parties and things, and people will be very impressed. But even after today, I guarantee you'll have a sense of that word, and maybe you'll realize you do know that word, even if you've never heard it before. And so we're going to be looking at a variety of episodes of the series and at scriptures to see how maybe they speak to each other. How many of you here have seen the old version of The Twilight Zone from the 1960s, right? And you probably, some of you have a favorite episode. Take just a minute and turn to somebody. If you've got an episode you remember, just share with them real quick. You know, it's that one where such and such happens. Just do that real quick. Okay, so there's the one where the woman gets locked in the department store after hours and she finds out that she is a mannequin. And there's the one with William Shatner on the plane, and what's on the wing of the plane? A monster. And there's the one where the aliens leave behind a book that says to serve man, and it turns out it's a cookbook, a book on how to cook humans. That's right. So, yeah. Some of the shows were a little silly, but we're hopefully going to dig into some deep stuff over the next few weeks. And this really is going to be a series that will build upon itself. And I know a lot of us are traveling now, and we can't be here every single Sunday. So I really encourage you on the Sundays you can't be here, follow up on our website and listen to the audio of the ones that you've missed, because I think you'll really get a deeper sense of where we're heading. And I think this series has the potential to maybe take our congregation in a new direction, or at least open us up to some new possibilities. And so we're going to be building on that from week to week. Today we begin with a text from the ancient book of Genesis, chapter 28. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder. I'm going to stop here for just a second, by the way. The text used the word ladder, but really it should be, it turns out Led Zeppelin got it right. It's a stairway to heaven, all right? So think about that. It's really supposed to be modeled on the ancient Mesopotamian ziggurat buildings that had sort of a step look to the sides of them. So it's either a set of steps or it's a ramp going up to heaven. But in the text it says that he sees this ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called that place Bethel. Submitted for your approval then, this character Jacob, last name unknown. A character from the ancient book of Genesis, a holy book, but make no mistake about it, Jacob is not a holy man. He is a petty man. He is a small man. And he is about to take a journey in tonight where he will discover, along with us, life in the Twilight Zone. Now, perhaps you know a little bit of the backstory to Jacob. Jacob, we're told, has a brother, a twin brother, who's just a little bit older than he is, named Esau. And they're being raised by their parents, Isaac and Rebekah. Now, although these two guys are brothers, they couldn't be more different from each other, even just in their appearance. Esau, we're told, is hairy, and Jacob is smooth. Esau is a hard worker, and Jacob, not so much. He likes to just sort of hang around the kitchen all day waiting to eat something. And Esau, we're told, is not the brightest bulb in the bunch. Jacob, on the other hand, is quite the conniver. In fact, there's an episode earlier in the story where Esau has been out working hard all day, and he comes home, he's hungry, and Jacob has made up some stew, and Jacob basically tricks him into trading his birthright as the elder son for a bowl of stew. Esau was not a long-range planner, that's for sure. And then, a little bit further in the story, while Esau is out working hard one day, Jacob, along with his mother, conspires to have Jacob disguise himself to look like Esau. He puts some goat skins on him so he looks hairy like his brother or feels hairy like his brother. And he goes to his ancient father who has sight issues, and he tricks the father into thinking it's Esau, the older brother. And he tricks the father into giving him the blessing that is supposed to go to the older brother. So now Jacob, this conniver, has been able to wrestle away all the things that his brother should have inherited as his right, as being the slightly older twin. And when Esau comes back from work and discovers what Jacob has done, he's enraged and he says, I'm going to get revenge. As soon as our father is dead, I will get revenge on you. And so Rebekah, the mother, says to Jacob, you need to get out of here. One, to escape the wrath of your brother, but we'll say, and this is what I actually want you to do, that you're going to Haran, to this village far away where your uncle lives, and there I want you to find yourself a wife. And so Jacob goes on this journey between his hometown and Haran, and along the way, he gets tired, it's night, and he stops to take a nap. He puts his head on a rock for a pillow, and he has this mystical experience, this experience of the divine. He sees this vision of this ramp, this stairway to heaven. There are angels coming down delivering messages and angels going up delivering messages. And even God stands right next to Jacob and speaks to him. He has a mystical experience. We might call it an experience of liminality. We've arrived at the word now. All right. Liminality. This word comes out of anthropology. And it's a word that's often used when we're talking about how cultures deal with rituals. It actually comes from a Latin word that means threshold. Threshold. And so liminality is that space when you're in between. You've crossed a threshold, but you're in between two things. And we often use rituals in our cultures to help people move through liminal space, liminal time, move through the in-betweenness. So think about this. Some of you recently have experienced graduation ceremonies. A graduation ceremony moves you through liminal space. You enter that ceremony that evening as a high school student, and for the short time that you're in the ceremony, you're in liminal space. It's ambiguous. You're not sure what you are, but as soon as it's done, you emerge, and now you're something else. You're a high school graduate, a college graduate, and then sometimes you're an adult in a new way when you come out of that experience. Or you might think of a wedding as a ritual that moves us through liminal space. When you enter a wedding, you are a single person. And then you move into the time of the ceremony, this liminal space that's somewhat ambiguous. And the ritual helps you move so that when you come out of it, you're a different person. You're now part of a different sort of family. You have a different personhood when you step through that ritual. The Bible is full of liminal experiences, people that are moving, that they're in the in-between of slavery and freedom, the in-between of exile and return to home, the in-between for Jesus between death on a cross and the liminal space he's in before the resurrection. And for many people that encounter Jesus, they are living in the liminal space between feeling that they are unworthy and knowing that they are loved. These liminal spaces are everywhere. In fact, sometimes for some of you, worship is a liminal space. The rituals we do here help you move through liminality. Some of you today entered this room as one person. Is it possible that you will exit as a different person while you're in this liminal space? I'd actually argue that we spend most of our lives in liminal space. Most of our lives are spent in the in-between of who we were and who we're becoming, of where we used to be and where we're going. We live in liminality, in liminal space. Now, I was first introduced to this concept when I was a middle schooler in junior high school, we used to call it back then. And They were showing on the local PBS station late at night at 10:30 reruns of the 1960s classic TV series, The Twilight Zone. And my bedtime was 10 o'clock, but my mother thought that we should get to see this show. And so after my dad would go to bed, and after we pretended to go to bed, she then would let us sneak back downstairs. I got a great mom, I got to tell you. She would let us sneak back downstairs just for that half hour so we could watch The Twilight Zone. And if you think about it, The Twilight Zone is all about liminality. It's all about that in-between. Even the name of the series, The Twilight Zone, we're told by Rod Serling, it's the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. It lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. It's the dimension of the imagination. Almost every episode of The Twilight Zone takes place in some sort of in-between, ambiguous time or space or experience that people are moving through. And in fact, there is an episode of The Twilight Zone that in many ways perfectly parallels this story that we have today out of the ancient texts of Genesis. It is also a story about a guy who's going on a journey of sorts, a guy who's trying to run away from struggle and problems in his life. And it's about a guy who has a dream, and in that dream he gets a vision of a better world maybe to come. It's an episode called A Stop at Willoughby. Now in this episode, the main character is named Garth Williams. He's a 38-year-old ad executive working in New York City, and he hates his job. He is just weighed down by the pressures of corporate America. He's developing ulcers. He spends all day having his boss yell at him because he's not doing his job well enough. He goes home at evening to his wife who doesn't think that he's competitive enough, that he's moving up the ladder quickly enough, that he makes enough money for them. And so he really wants to escape his life. And each day he takes a commuter train home from New York City to his house in the suburbs. And the story is set during the winter time, and it's snowing outside. And while he's on this train and looking out the window at the snow, he falls asleep, and suddenly he wakes up, and the train is stopped. Except it's not the train that he was in before. It's a train clearly from like the turn of the century, the late 1800s. And the train has stopped at this little town called Willoughby. And he looks out the window, and it's not winter anymore, and it's certainly not snowing. It's a beautiful, warm summer day. And he looks out, and there's this idyllic little turn-of-the-century village called Willoughby, where kids are walking around with fishing poles and barefoot off to go do some fishing for the day. And there are people riding bicycles and listening to music at a band concert. And it's just this beautiful, restful, peaceful setting. And then the train jolts, and he wakes up, and he's back on his commuter train in the present. Well, as the story moves on, he has this dream several times on the way home, and finally has a particularly bad day at work where the pressure has just gotten too much and he can't take it anymore. He calls his wife and says, "I've got to come home. I can't do this anymore." She hangs up on him. She's had enough of him, and he gets on the train and he falls asleep, and he wakes up, and it's Willoughby. And this time, he decides he's going to get off the train. He leaves his briefcase behind, he steps off, and he's immediately greeted by name by the people in the town. They welcome him, they're glad that he's finally here, and for maybe the first time in a long time in his life, he feels restful and peaceful. Then the scene shifts back to present time. We see that his commuter train has stopped, that the conductor and others are standing out in the snow, and there is a body in the snowbank. It's Garth Williams. The conductor says he shouted something about Willoughby, and then he jumped off the back of the train. And he is dead. And a local funeral parlor has sent a hearse to pick up the body, and they're putting the body into the back of the hearse, and as the doors close, we see the name of the funeral home is Willoughby and Son Funeral Home. That's often the Twilight Zone has a little twist ending like that. So here's the story of Garth Williams on this journey. He's sort of experiencing in liminal space this other possible reality. Is it real? We're not sure. Does it exist alongside of our reality? Or is it a totally different reality? Is it already there and he just didn't see it all this time? What are we to make of all this? He is living and existing in this liminal in-between space. In the same way then, Jacob in our story takes this journey. He's running away from his problems too, and he stops in this middle of his journey from here to there, He stops in this journey in the middle of waking and sleeping, night and day, and he has this liminal experience, this dream, this vision of this staircase, of these heavenly messengers, and God comes to him in this vision. Now, Jacob, by the way, is not a religious man. He doesn't really care about this God that others have talked about. So God even has to introduce God's self in this moment and say, by the way, you don't know me, but I'm God, the God that you've heard about. Now, here's what we would like to hear God say to Jacob in this moment. At least I would. I'd like to hear God say to Jacob, hey, Jacob, why are you such a jerk? Why do you only think about yourself? Why do you disregard the feelings and the rights and needs of other people? Why are you such a conniver and a cheat and a manipulator of other people? Be gone from my sight. But of course, that's not at all what God says to Jacob. He doesn't even mention all of Jacob's past prior bad deeds. In fact, what he says to Jacob is good news. He repeats to him the same promise that this God has given to Jacob's ancestor, Abraham. He says, Jacob, I just want you to know, man, I'm here for you. And I'm going to give you and your people land. I'm going to give you progeny so your line continues. I'm going to help you all be a blessing to the whole world. And I'm going to be with you all along the way. I promise my presence for you. So I don't know about you, but this bothers me. I mean, here's this terrible, despicable character who has stolen his brother's blessing, and now here is God giving him another blessing on top of it. What are we to make of the fact that the protagonist of the story is such a terrible person? Well, it might be that we're really not supposed to be paying attention to the character. We're supposed to be paying attention to the experience that he's having, this liminal, mystical experience of the presence of the divine. Now, there are some of us sitting here today saying, well, I'm never going to have an experience like that. Some of us are saying, I'm not worthy enough to have God come and talk to me and bless me. I'm not religious enough. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not pious enough to have one of these experiences. That only happens to really good people, really spiritual people, really loving and perfect people. But clearly the story today tells us that's not true, right? If anybody was, we might say, unworthy of such an experience, it's Jacob, and yet God comes to him. If God can come to Jacob and bless Jacob, God can certainly come to each of us in our time. And we often think that we can only have these liminal, in-between, mystical experiences of the presence of God in the midst of stained glass or lit candles or special music coming out of special books. But the story today tells us that's not true either, right? Jacob's not in some sacred place. It's not some holy place. He just stopped here because he got tired and it was night, and he grabbed a stone to put his head on and went to sleep. And he has this vision. These sorts of liminal experiences of the deep presence of God can happen to us too. Now, how many of us here are ever going to have an experience of a vision of God and a staircase and angels? How many of us are going to have a dream that's so real like Willoughby that we can step into it? Probably not most of us. But that's not the only way God's presence comes to us. Sometimes it comes to us in the midst of the everydayness of life. We have a tendency to think that mystical experiences are out there, they're amorphous, but they're really part of the reality of life. I've been reading lately this author named Ted Nottingham, who writes a lot on what they call esoteric Christianity. He writes about Christian mysticism and spirituality, and he says that the mystical experience that we tend to think is out here somewhere, the mystical experience is the true reality. It's the true, real experience of life if we open ourselves to it. He says that Christianity at its core is a mystical religion. It's about knowing the reality of the Spirit of God. We tell a story of a man who is imbued with the Spirit of God, that his whole life flowed from and flowed out of the Spirit of God, that he was matter, that he was physical human life, but the Spirit of God lived within him. And then at Pentecost, we tell the story that same Spirit, that mystical, liminal Spirit, moved through other people, through the disciples. And we also say that Spirit moved through history, and it lands here today on you, and you, and you, and all of you. That in the liminality of life, in the in-betweenness of life, where we spend most of our time, God is present. God is with us and wanting to move in and through us. Just chew on that for a while. So we're just dipping our toes into the waters of liminality today. We're not trying to get it all out this Sunday. We've got 3 more Sundays to explore this idea and what it might mean for us. But I do want to throw out a few thoughts for you to consider as your week progresses. What would it mean for us as a church, in the life of our church or in your individual lives, for us to become places of liminality for other people? What if we, in our individual lives and in our life as a church, became that place where heaven and earth connect? How often we think of them as something that's separate, disconnected, but what if we could create more experiences where people found the two together, where they found the presence of God in our midst? What would it look like, and how would we accomplish that? And what would it mean in our personal lives and in our lives as a church if we really intentionally went out and said we want to find people who are in liminal space, those who are in between? And lots of us are living in the in-between, between marriage and divorce, between health and sickness, between the end of life and what comes after life, between understanding who we are and accepting a new identity. What would it mean for us to be more intentional about walking with people in that liminality of saying we want to companion with you as you walk through the in-betweenness of life? By the way, eventually Jacob has to figure out that he really did not steal that blessing from his brother because it wasn't his to take in the first place. And that blessing that God gives them in the story today isn't for him, and it's not just for his people. What they have to come to realize is that the blessing is for everybody. And so in a time when we might ever feel like we need to be turning in and only looking after ourselves and taking care of ourselves and our own, here is a word from the ancient scriptures telling us, no. As you walk through the liminality of life, open your hearts to God's Spirit. Know where you are now, but also be open to where God might be leading you. Let's pray.